Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am a bag of emotions today, so bear with me. This is me, 5 years old. I remember that beautiful dress, but it itched so much, and I love that purse. I wish I had it back. When I look at this photograph, I ask myself, who could have thought that me, that girl, will be here today? But this is an honor to be here. Thank you. Growing up in Guatemala City, these were the streets that saw me grow up. I had dreams and aspirations, but during that time, I was not certain if those dreams involved becoming an artist. But now the answer is clear. I have always been an artist. And in one of these photos, you can see the store Libreria Palin is a library, only 2 blocks away from my home. That is where I used to go and buy all the material supplies for my projects, and I can still remember the smell of the place. I don't know if that happens to you. Certain smells bring you back, and that's what that photograph does alone. So I often say that everything I do it for them. These are the women in my family. They dedicated their lives to the home, but often forgot about their dreams. And breaking free from stand by your man no matter what, that just didn't sit right with me. So I had to forge my own path, and here I am. I am a first-generation college graduate. I do believe that they are here with me on stage today. And to my small but mighty family, my children, daughter-in-law, and granddaughters, I want them to remember that dreams are timeless, that you have to follow your passion, for it can lead to new paths at any stage in life. And I hope to inspire them and you or anyone out there by showing that the power of unwavering passion and hard work. Yes, and that happiness is a wish that we all need to achieve. The notion of standing before a crowd in the ceramic world, representing my art and experiences, was once non-existent. The transition from a young Guatemalan girl to an artist standing on stage is a testament to the profound power of life, purpose, and the courage to follow the instincts and voices within, whatever they may be, urging you to pursue what you truly love. And after 8 years of owning and later selling a small business, I ventured into the corporate world. However, fate took an unexpected turn when I, along with everyone in my department, was laid off. Surprisingly, that setback turned out to be a joyful opportunity, as it led me to finally pursue my passion for arts. To pursue that path, I needed to get my Guatemalan college transcript. It was time-consuming and costly, so I opted out for getting a GED. It's kind of like going back to high school twice in your lifetime. But also, I needed that mental refresher after many years away from formal education. And overcoming my aversion to math was a challenge. Nonetheless, I persisted and managed to pass the math component by a slim margin, thanks to the fortunate timing of the changing grading system in Kentucky. It took me, yes, I was lucky then. I needed 3 points, and one morning I received an email from one of my instructors and said, Erika, this Department of Kentucky changed the grading system, you have passed. Like, yes, so time was on my side. But, with all those sacrifices, I knew that it wasn't going to be easy. Balancing 30 hours of work per week after going back to school, of course, and then full-time school and family life demanded constant sacrifices. However, with support from my family and the art community, and my journey as a non-traditional student, time was precious, and there is no secret formula for success in the art world. So in May 2019, a pivotal moment during my BFA senior year altered both my mental and artistic path. Hysterectomy brought about a profound shift in how I view my body, sustenance, and life itself, craving nourishment for recovery. And I delved into the world of fruits and vegetables with newfound intentionality. And around the same time, fate led me to discover clay through a local nonprofit supporting immigrants, refugees, and surrounding communities. Aligning perfectly with plans for a teaching kitchen, clay became a medium of functional potential. Weekly community ceramics classes soon followed, and as part of the team that initiated this program, I found myself deeply connected to clay's possibilities. Inspired by the healthy foods aiding my healing, I began sculpting fruits and vegetables, and this artistic journey served as a lifeline through periods of depression and identity questioning. My works began to explore the delicate balance between authenticity and artifice, reflecting the changes in my body. Ceramics and real fruits weave together, symbolizing both decay and permanence, a visual narrative of my post-surgery journey. Sculpting these forms became a deeply therapeutic process, a means of reclaiming agency over my body and discovering new purpose in my art. So clay became my emotional outlet, resonating with those facing challenges like my own post-surgery. Graduating in 2020 with limited clay knowledge and amidst a pandemic, I took a leap of faith and applied to top MFA ceramic programs. I thought that all they can say is no, right? I figured if I had what it takes, I had to go and pursue what I wanted to do, and strangers would see it. And with fear and all, I was accepted into the ceramics program at the Cranbrook Academy of Arts. Leaving family and my art community was tough, but it fueled my determination. Life threw more challenges my way, including overcoming a wrist bone fracture on my dominant hand. So my first year of grad school, I only had one hand, so I had to deal with that too. So the air compressed extruder became my essential tool, allowing me to create forms with just one hand, a necessity during my first year of grad school. Enlarging bananas, symbols of my internal struggles, sparked the idea for a mural. The clay bananas resembling snakes crawled up the wall, symbolizing life's complexities. As my body and mind healed, I turned my focus to topics beyond my personal struggles. Drawing inspiration from my diet, my work organically took a political turn, adding layers to my understanding of my upbringing and the world around me. Reflecting on my teenage years amidst the political turmoil in my home country during the Reagan presidency, I explored the significance of the banana form in my work. This fascination became a gateway to understanding the complexities of my upbringing. I had attended an all-girls private school just blocks away from the National Palace, our country's seat of power. This was a time when the CIA, in collaboration with the United Fruit Company, inflicted a dark mark on our history, resulting in loss among indigenous communities. Now my work started to make sense, to take form, to become important with its own voice. I became the vehicle for this material as I continued my one-hand journey with clay, using various items as molds. One day I used a fresh banana without considering the consequences. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I realized too late that removing the mold would destroy the piece. Faced with no other choice, I decided to leave it be, resulting in a putrid side odor. It was awful. But thankfully, my studio mates were kind and didn't complain. At least I didn't hear anything, so I don't know. Yeah. But this incident marked a pivotal moment. A simple banana fire inside porcelain at Cone 10 inspired an innovative, clear, glossy glazing technique. It transformed my porcelain work. So the photograph right there, the dark glaze, my organic glaze as the banana prior to the firing, and that is porcelain fire at Cone 10, and the clear glossy, that's just the banana itself, no chemicals. As I near the completion of my MFA, I made a daring decision to apply for a summer residency at the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. It was another leap of faith, imposter syndrome setting in once again, facing my fears head on and using that fear as fuel. And doubting myself on the possibility, I ended up becoming a summer resident at the Bray. It was a dream I never dared to dream, but somehow, against all odds, it came true. And during my summer in Montana, my artistic exploration took a new turn with experiments using various types of fresh produce, such as spinach and strawberries and other things. This became one of the driving forces behind my work in a journey that continues to evolve. And although the journey into the banana world and the United Fruit Company didn't end there, I continue the process of investigating the banana industry and how to best approach it. Not from the standpoint of canceling the banana industry, that will never happen, but simply bringing awareness to the implications the United Fruit Company had in capitalism and the many ways they civilized the banana to introduce it into American homes. As I continue experimenting with produce, I also explore the importance of raising awareness about the diverse reasons behind immigration and fostering empathy for our newest neighbors. This investigation led me to examine the capitalist systems that often perpetuate inequality and displacement. Through my work, I aim to shed light on the complex issues that drive people to leave their homes, hoping to cultivate greater understanding and empathy for those embarking on new journeys. This exploration was not just about the experiments. It was a continued investigation into the significance of education, awareness, and empathy, again, within our communities. And transitioning to the brave proved to be challenging, but it was the kind of challenge that was ultimately rewarding. The journey to get there was not easy. I made the trip over 4 days, experiencing anxiety attacks along the way, fearing that my old sedan would break down with all of my tools and ceramics for the residency show. There were many times when I cried out of pure fear as I navigated the never-ending hills. However, I also found moments of pure joy. The beauty of the expansive skies, feeling like I was driving amidst vast open spaces, reminded me of something I often dreamed as a little girl. It was a mix of emotions, fear and excitement, anxiety and awe, and that defined my journey to the Bray. The equipment situation also presented its own set of challenges when I got to the Bray. I realized there was no air-compressed extruder available. So panic set in. What was I going to do after days of battling depression and severe burnout? I remember the initial reason why I fell in love with clay and began making the banana towers by hand. This process took much longer as I had to hand build each ring individually. It would take about 2 days to complete a single tower, a process that previously would take only a couple hours to create the form. Yet, this slower, more deliberate method forced me to reconnect with the essence of my craft, allowing me to rediscover the joy in the process itself. Now that my dominant hand was better, I was amazed at what I could do with 2 working hands. That was a good feeling. And as I was hand building the banana towers, I began to wonder what would happen if, instead of ending 1 ring at a time, I continued building without stopping. This thought led me to the creation of the double wall vessels. And instead of concealing the interior, I chose to make it an essential and fundamental part of the design. This was a way to unveil the industry's hidden history behind the items I buy from my local market. And returning to the hand-building process of ceramics had sparked new ideas, resulting in evolving forms. Bananas now feature expressive accents of relief, sgraffito, and new surface treatments. And with the introduction of premium gold luster, symbolizing the banana industry's value comparable to that of gold itself, driven by greed and power. Through wordplay, I explore hidden meanings, extending the narrative of colonization, immigration, and global dominance. The wall banana picture here reads foreign, but upon closer examination, its breakdown reveals for possession. This wordplay uncovers a deeper layer of commentary on ownership and control. And as I explore deeper into the essence of my work, discovering its voice and message, my art becomes a tapestry woven with personal tales, stories of sacrifices and daring leaps that weave through resilience. The technique of clay and my stories belong together. Each clay piece carries a story, each story a lesson. and transforming walls into murals. I investigate the stories of my people and how they translate to today's world. My aim to educate, kindle awareness, and foster dialogue in the safe spaces I create. So I ask those who resist immigration, ever ponder the origin of bananas? Will you refuse them too? For every banana is an immigrant just like me. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all. It has been an indescribable joy and honor to share my work with you all. Thank you for the conversations and the hugs. As an artist educator living in Canada, my privileges and responsibilities are rooted in a network of relationships. The imperial relationship between Britain and Egypt created a channel for my mum to immigrate to Canada, founded on the brutal colonial relationships with Indigenous peoples who called the land home and kin long before it was called Canada. I don't stand alone. I'm up here because of another network of relationships. There are so many people who have helped me along my journey. Several of them are here, including Erika and her friends Michael and Osei, Emily and the other volunteers who helped to pack up our exhibitions last night in a flurry of activity. The biggest thank you goes to my family. I couldn't do what I do without the support of my husband, Mike, and I am grateful and proud to be the daughter of Ibtisam Kalada Sedra. My mom gave me life and saved my life more than once. She continues to give me structures to push against and structures to thrive within. My practice is a search for understanding of how I fit into the vast complexity of our species. My mom is a survivor, but she is not unmarked by her trauma. During my childhood, she withdrew from the Egyptian community. So growing up, I didn't feel I belonged in many of the spaces I was moving through. I wasn't Egyptian enough. I wasn't Canadian enough. I was of both places and of neither. This left me with an aching to belong. Using sculpture, installation, and mark making, I look to visualize and actualize my connectedness to human and non-human beings around me. My mom is a doctor, and I grew up with an irrepressible curiosity for biology, the human body, and all its weird gloops and globs. My relationship with clay began around the same time I was studying biology in undergrad, which continues to influence my work. My sculptural work uses an aesthetic of cellular accumulation to visualize the human species as an interconnected organism. So I'm using microscopic landscapes to take a macro perspective on how I fit in. Visualizing our species in this way stands in opposition to individualism, which prioritizes individual gains over mutual care. The truth is, not one of us can stand alone. Every day, we thrive or don't because of relationships that transcend the boundaries drawn between us. I make my sculptural work using unfired clay, supported by a network of wire and wood. The title of this installation, Polyanthroponemia, refers to the destructive impacts human activities are having on the earth. Working in unfired clay allows me to reuse most of my materials, reducing my consumption and waste. After this exhibition at the Gardner Museum in Toronto, I took the work apart, reclaiming the clay and wire and wood, and this same clay has taken on many different forms, which you'll see in this presentation. This primordial material bears the memory of the earliest artists, connecting me to human and non-human bodies across time and space. For millennia, humans have built new civilizations on the bones of the previous ones. With this work, I'm asking, how do I live to honor those who have gone before me? And how do I live in a way to empower those who will come after me? My columns series visualizes our species in relation to the structures that we use to organize our societies. In referencing a symbol used in empires worldwide, I'm questioning how can we reconcile our connectedness with structures intentionally built to elevate a select few. I'm also constantly reckoning with how I can use my position within these structures to empower those with less access and visibility. These structures that I build are impermanent, ready to be deconstructed and reconfigured. My hope is that in remembering that these structures have been built and upheld, we can visualize how to dismantle them together. I stain the clay with washes of color, inspired by the stains used to recognize various tissue types and cellular proteins. Instead of camouflaging or even smothering difference with the monotoned palette that I used in earlier works, I'm embracing a brighter color palette that hopefully leans towards a more hopeful, vibrant tone. At many times throughout human history, including now, it has seemed like our societies are teetering on the brink of collapse. I try to remember that this instability and potential collapse provide productive spaces to envision alternate futures. The questions I'm asking with this work is, how can I help to push the system off balance in pursuit of more equity and sustainability? And how can I help my students through experiences that show them that through thoughtful experimentation and the support of their communities, they can approach risk and failure as sites for growth and evolution. My mark-making practice is motivated by my experiences as a second-generation Egyptian Canadian. Growing up in Ontario, Canada, a predominantly white region of Ontario, Canada, I've felt both hyper-visible as one of the few people of color in any room, and invisible, as my cultural mixture was never represented in pop culture or educational spaces. Without it being explicitly stated, I had learned that white was the way to be. So where did that leave me? I learned to put on different skins in order to blend in. I had internalized the implicit messaging that a brown woman like me shouldn't be seen. It wasn't until grad school here at VCU that I began to see Black and brown women being featured as examples of excellence. In this space, I slowly began to realize that I have a right to be seen on my own terms. From this, my mark-making practice emerged. When I say it like that, it sounds like on Monday I had this realization and was making fully realized work on Tuesday. Nope. In the fraughtness that is grad school, I abandoned this work that I didn't yet understand, only to see it reemerge 4 years later through a period of playful experimentation in the studio. Conversations with friends and colleagues and prolonged fellowship with the written works of Bell Hooks and Edward Glissant helped me to understand this compulsion to transcribe my fingerprint. My mark-making practice blends references to the color field genre and cave paintings. At its most fundamental level, art can be a way of asserting one's presence, saying, I am here. Just as prehistoric artists used pigments of the earth to record their presence, I use soil, clay, and naturally occurring oxides to create compositions on paper and site-specific works by repeatedly transcribing my mark. Until the 1960s, Canadian immigration policy explicitly favored people of European descent. The legacy of this policy is still visible in most of the rooms I enter, reminding me that whiteness was the goal for my country. It is in this context that I continue to insist on my right to be seen and take up space. Using my fingerprint allows me to do this in a way that doesn't reveal anything of my interior self. In other words, I'm insisting on my right to visibility, insisting on my right to take up space without performing any aspect of my identity. Between the two, explored the space between visibility and opacity using 2 site-specific installations at AB Projects, run by Nicole Seisler. Nicole helped me to be ambitious with this space, supporting me throughout the process of ideating, visualizing, and executing the work. The window installation of terracotta remnants obscured the site-specific painting, so that only by entering into the gallery were both works fully visible. My fingerprint, the most individual mark I can make, is a universal one. My mark-making practice has become a way for me to make space for other members of marginalized communities to join me in transforming white spaces by recording our presence. This past January, with help from Jasmine Bates, I invited 8 students, each of us members of a global majority, to join me in making this site-specific painting as part of the 79th Scripps Annual Exhibition. This time lapse is from a site-specific project in 2022. Each of our marks were present throughout the composition, with none of us laying claim to any particular region. While the specifics of our lived experiences suggested boundaries between us, coming together to create this work provided a means to visualize and enact our shared humanity. With each fingerprint, each of us reaffirmed our commitment to transforming this gallery wall through consistent effort over time. The power of art is in its ability to transform our ways of seeing and thinking. Perhaps visualizing our societies as temporary structures can help us to envision and create more equitable structures to care for each other. Perhaps a fingerprint can help us remember our connectedness to each other. But we can't stop there. So how do we go forward? How do we transform this understanding of our connectedness into action? Many small acts can become a transformative force. My role as an educator is to make sure that every one of my students can see themselves represented in their curriculum. The work must be intersectional. Just one token isn't enough. It never was. Let me be more explicit. My job, and the job of every educator, is to see each and every one of our students who are part of historically marginalized groups and find ways so that they can see themselves represented as examples of excellence. I know there are many educators here working alongside me in this, but we need all of you. In order to liberate us all, we all must do the work. So my question to you is, where are your spheres of influence? Who is not being seen or empowered there? And what actions can you take and turn into a persistent practice that honors our responsibilities to each other? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gloria Jue-Youn Han, and I make pots for good ancestors. The expansion of space inside of the pot on a wheel is an extension of the lungs in my chest. I make my pots as though I share a breath with them, to hold the collective breaths, sighs of relief and of exasperation of the Korean diaspora. After the last firing of a piece, moments of tension and release are frozen. I notice the tension and the fullness of the shoulders of my favorite Korean pots, and I wonder if their makers found moments of peace during the periods of violence, colonization, and war. My journey has been a 10-year fight of refusing the unhelpful dichotomy of craft versus art, of modern versus traditional, and East versus West. For 8 years, I've been studying traditional Korean ceramics with Master Clay Jong-hoon Kim and Sylvia Sung-soon Kim, who live in BC, Canada. I became interested in the notion of tradition as it's mostly been used at me in an othering way, as though it is merely a burden, and used by me to explain away important cultural nuances that were dear to me. When expressing interest in studying Korean pottery during my BFA, I was told that it was too traditional and that I shouldn't even bother to make pots. This was especially harmful as I watched my white counterparts be praised for misappropriating Korean and Asian aesthetics. If I showed you all the greens and blues that I thought were celadon, the tests might outnumber the things that I mistakenly thought were the defining aspects of Korean culture. My teachers moved to Canada in 2001 from Incheon, Korea. Master Kim noticed how while people were aware of celadon ceramics and Korean celadon, it was greatly misunderstood. From the kind of iron-bearing stoneware that is used, to the amount of time a pot is held under this unforgiving glaze, to the way that inlay or sangam is mislabeled as mishima, because mishima is not inlay. I look to the elders in my community as a connection to the so-called motherland, but realized that they were also diasporic and were also going through challenges of identity and belonging. It made them feel a whole ocean's length closer to me. I consider our relationship as mentor-mentee rather than apprentice-master or teacher-student. The way that he has taught me is different than the strict apprentice-master relationship that many of you may have heard of or endured. And this relationship itself is a beautiful example of the ways in which traditions are adapted by a diaspora. If I make work in pure reverence for tradition, I am seen as a traditional purist, yet fetishized for performing my culture. If I make work in irreverence for tradition, I am praised by the Western Academy for assimilating correctly. Thinking about tradition as an ever-evolving thing has helped me realize that new traditions are formed every day, and I get to decide what's important. At first, studying celadon served as a case study to investigate how traditions were abandoned, adapted, or created anew by diasporic peoples. Now I know that my version of Korean ceramics is not its rebirth or reinvention in a Western context, but part of a continued lineage. In case anyone didn't believe me when I said that I carved my relief work or a yanggak with a hacksaw blade, this is just one of the traditional tools that I've learned how to make, and no, it's not a stencil. A turning point for me was in December 2021. I received the BC Arts Council Early Career Development Grant that I used to focus on this mentorship for a year. It afforded me the slowness that I've needed to develop my skills and confidence as a knowledge keeper. I spent the first 4 to 5 months of it trying to make this Myebyong or prunus vase. This is practice pot number 15 and the only one that I fired. I've been interested in making bottles that are just meant to exist. The bottles I make don't have to be functional so that I can really play with scale and proportions and pack in as much detail as I want. Details make people stay. They make people care, like receiving a very thoughtful gift. I think about what it means to be able to make things outside of Korea, what pressures I'm not having to face. There are potters who have gone to Korea to do a 1 or 2 year apprenticeship and come back as though they're an expert and teach Korean techniques incorrectly while their teachers struggle to make a living. I was hesitant to show the work that was in the expo hall during this conference. These pots are what take the longest time to make, but they feel like such a small part of my entire practice. There are so many parts of this process that I will never show anyone, including short performances for myself and many, many phone calls to my mom. To me, all the work feels like practice pots. Since graduating from my MFA at SAIC in 2019, I've been doing everything that I can to protect my limited days with my mentors. This meant that I was either teching or teaching 5 to 11 classes a week in 3 different community centers in 3 different municipalities, sometimes in the same day. I did this because I needed to take the pressure off the work that I was making. I needed it to take as long as it took to learn things fully, which meant not showing or selling work for as long as possible. They still don't feel ready, and that's probably some internalized, unhelpful academic standards. But I realized that my community back home couldn't wait for me to be ready to show what I do, and I needed to be ready like yesterday. If you've ever been told that your exploration of traditional craft wasn't conceptual enough or academic enough, this is for you. If you've ever been gatekept from what felt like home, being told that you're not Asian enough or whatever enough, this is for you. If you've ever felt as though you don't see yourself represented, this is for you. And I'm sorry that you have to become that representation. And we need you to speak your voice, or speak your truth as your voice shakes, and to ask your uncertain questions. The multiplicity of forms and voices in this practice adds complexity to it, and is therefore more resilient to being stereotyped, essentialized, and orientalized. A tradition needs both its roots and its future mutations. I invite you all to consider that all traditions were once contemporary, and invite you to let it stay complicated. I'm trusted by my teachers to carry this knowledge forward by both learning what is traditional to this craft and developing new generations. I used to think that the purpose of my work was to prove a point or to achieve a little corner of justice for people who look like me and for myself. As I have stepped into positions of responsibility in the last 5 years, my practice has evolved to hold the strength, love, and tenderness required to be an artist, teacher, traditional knowledge keeper, and friend. In grad school, I was researching heavy topics like colonization and racism. While the work from this research felt necessary and important, I realized that I did not owe anyone my pain. I share a breath with my work. When I see Korean pottery in museum collections, I wonder how they got there. I note the provenance and credit line. Gift of Mrs. Roger G. Jerry, 1996. Credit line. Gregory and Maria C. Henderson, Medford, Massachusetts. Inherited by Maria C. Henderson, Medford, Massachusetts. Partial gift and partial purchase to Harvard University Art Museum. I wonder if they miss home, if they're scared, if we know we think of them. My craft is a mode of expression for extreme devotion, love, and intimacy. I have a job to do from this unique perspective of a young diasporic woman, as traditions would not have lived on but for the collective and continued actions of women. With each pot I throw, carve, and glaze, I intend to take a staunch place among these women. While the result of my practice is Celadon pots, the work is not really about Celadon or Koreanness, but through Celadon and through Koreanness, or more specifically, through a Korean diasporic lens. It's about the process of relationship building and by grounding traditions and traditional craft as impressive feats of innovation and technology. I resist the primitivization of traditional knowledge. Through these relationships, I begin the important work of figuring out what to do with what we've inherited. This work is called I Love You Forever and for Always. It's a site-specific installation made up of slip-cast, bisque-fired stoneware baseboards. I called my mother to ask her what camellia symbolized in Korea, and she said, I love you forever and for always. Culture exists in the relationships between people and the people's relationship with the land. I like making people look at the things they're not supposed to pay attention to, the things you don't notice until it's gone, the structures that feel immovable. I made this work using my hard-fought traditional skills to say that wherever society may put me at that time, I'm making my mark before I leave that spot. And that's a promise. I make pots for good ancestors. I started thinking about what it means to be a good descendant first, mostly in the context of good daughterhood. I at first considered it in the context of being a good Korean daughter, which was based on a very narrow scope of strict values coming from a very specific 1990s Korean male perspective that my parents didn't even want for me. After a lot of delayed onset teenage angst in my early 20s, I realized that being a good daughter, being a good descendant requires that I use my agency as part of the next generation to expand upon the work that my predecessors did, even if they don't like what I'm doing. That very agency to build my own future was hard fought by the gritty Korean women before me. But what does making pots for good ancestors mean? It means that I understand that I exist within a lineage of those who came before me and will come after me. We are sitting in a room of generational curse breakers, citizen artists, and catalysts for building community bridges. I think about what it means to receive and what it means to leave something behind. I need to thank those who carved a path for me to be here. This includes the elder Koreans in the audience who are either cheering me on or feeling annoyed and hypercritical. I see you. I hear you, I feel you. The ancestors are here. Thank you to my family for giving me their undying support. Thank you to my friends. Thank you to Jeff, my partner, who has been here enduring all of the NCECA chaos. Thank you to Michelle Castro and the rest of the NCECA team. And thank you to Master Kim and Mrs. Kim for their incredible generosity over the last 8 years. I'm grateful to myself for continuing to do what I'm drawn to and for caring for the subjects that feel most intimate, as this will nourish me and my art practice. With clay and a commitment to being a good ancestor, I continue the slow, daily work that is finding strength in softness and justice and love. Thank you.
Well, helito, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to start my time with you this morning a little unconventionally. I'd like to start with a little self-reflective thought exercise. So if you would, please close your eyes for a few moments. I'd like you to imagine yourself as a vessel. And this vessel is made up of all of your childhood experiences, the places you've lived, the people you've loved, and those that love you, the things that you find beautiful, those things that move you, that make you cry, make you laugh, the stories you may have to tell, the things that your hands have touched, the places you've walked. What is it that you see? What sort of vessel would you be? Now I ask that you please open your eyes when you're ready and keep the image of that vessel with you as I share a little bit about myself, who I am, where I've been, the sort of vessel that I am. Where are you from? Such a ubiquitous question, one that presumably better orients the inquisitor to the questioned, helps form the person, colors in the outlines, adds texture, dimension, a simple question. But I'm finding that this seemingly simple question is driving much of my artistic process at present. Home for me now is the high desert of northern New Mexico, a landscape of extremes. It's a place that can be harsh and cold in winter, scorching hot, unyielding in summer. We exist well over a mile in the sky, as if presented to the heavens for judgment. A desolate and sometimes lonely place, seemingly ambivalent to your existence if you don't know how to receive its love. Home is also the Choctaw Nation Reservation of Oklahoma, where my ancestors were forcibly relocated along the Trail of Tears, a place where I spent the first 40 years of my life. The horse's name is Rocky, by the way. The Choctaw Nation is a wild, fertile place that's overflowing with lush, thick, green vegetation. There's the sound of creek water lazily slipping over glistening rocks in my grandmother's voice. Going back even further, home is my ancestral homelands in what is now Mississippi. I don't know exactly how to describe this place, but it exists in silence within me. I'm a person of indigenous ancestry, a living testament to the resilience of my family against attempts to assimilate and exterminate our people. To be here at all, in front of you this morning, living a modern human existence, still calling this earth my home in the face of such challenges is a victory. One that I celebrate not only for myself, but also for those who did not survive to share in this triumph. While I can't boast an art degree or an extensive exhibition record yet, my artistic perspective is shaped by a unique journey, a life spent learning and practicing and teaching medicine while living in some of the most remote and untouched places one can find. I've seen humanity from angles most artists have not, from the relieved high fives and back slaps of welcoming new life to the solemn comfort given to the dying. From those anxiously gasping for breath from an illness they were told wasn't real, to sharing tears with a young person being gendered correctly for the first time. I know the human body, and I know the human spirit intimately. I also happen to know where we come from as humans. I find enormous magic, power, and poetry in my people's creation story. Having emerged from our home, Naniwaya, our mother mound, I've chosen to spend my life telling stories with the very clay that birthed me. Y'all, I am in love with clay. I love how it builds kinship and opens a dialogue between myself and others, both those currently living and all those that have come before us. It reminds me that my place, my home, is this earth, and that our home must be protected at all costs. For me, working with clay is a completely sensual experience. I love the velvety wetness of the clay as it slips through my palms while spinning on the wheel, the way it warms in my hands on a cold morning in the studio, the fleshy resistance when I compress it between my fingers, its malleability, its resilience, its durability, its strength once fired. All of these serve to connect me deeper to myself and my home, this earth, that bears witness to all of our stories. It is this home, our earth, that continues to shape my perception of beauty in the work that I'm making. Prior to my ancestors' forced relocation to Oklahoma, Choctaw potters crafted vessels for utility and ritual, as well as for the simple joy and beauty of it. Unfortunately, today, only a few of these vessels remain to inform us, to educate us, and to bind us to our original homelands. I'm proud to be a part of a handful seeking to revive our pottery traditions and reimagine them to allow us to tell stories about how it feels to be a modern-day Native person. Each vessel we make is both a rebellion against attempts to erase and colonize our people, as well as an opportunity to educate those willing to listen. Together, we assert our presence. I am still here, a part of this earth, forever inseparable. My current body of work continues to focus on an exploration of self, place, and how those two are intertwined. Inspired by the history, the plants, the animals, the atmospheric phenomena, and the geologic formations found in the high desert terrain where I now live, I see myself as a translator of sorts, using locally harvested materials to invite others to view the natural world through my eyes. With each piece, I aim to evoke a sense of appreciation and reverence for nature, showcasing the unique artistic expression that emerges from the collaboration between human hands and the raw materials surrounding us. Clay is not what I do, it's what I am. In this way of creating, my deep bonds with this land, my home, have only been strengthened. Each piece results from a process of meticulous consideration and utilizes a combination of modern and traditional approaches to creation and adornment. I seek to reflect the spirit of the land, my love letter to our home, this earth under our feet. In continuing to examine my roles as a healer, a witness to the suffering of others, and an artist, an interpreter of, and mirror to that suffering, my most recent series entitled Vessels explores the concepts of humans as objects of containment, holders and carriers of things. This series focuses on humans as carriers burdened with things they may not want, specifically mental illness. In this series, I pull from my own personal experience and the experience from caring for those with various mental illnesses to give us voice and dignity through thoughtful and respectful representations of these illnesses. Using these vessels, I demonstrate our beauty and honor our bravery. My process and body of work continues to inform my concept of self and home. For me, home is not restricted to a single place. I am many things. I exist in many places. Inside me lives the high desert, my Choctaw culture, our ancestral homelands, my training as a physician and the experiences gained from bringing this healing to my people. My work is a celebration of the powerful and enduring bonds between humanity and the earth. Through my art, I continue to tell stories of resilience, rebellion, and the love that binds me to those who hold my hands and the locations where I place my feet. From the heart of this vessel, to you, Yakoke, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, NCECA, for giving me this opportunity to share my work with these wonderful audience, and thank you all for coming. A frequently posed question to me has been about my journey into clay crafting. It all started when I was about 10 years old. My friends and I would embark on expeditions on construction sites along riverbanks in search of clay. Since we were quite young and lacked formal tools such as shovels, we found ways to improvise tools that will be used in digging clay once we stumble on these tools. These makeshift tools were then utilized to dig up clay from these locations. As transporting it back home, we would mold the clay into various sculptures as a way of reliving our childhood fantasies. These experiences, among my cherished childhood memories, serving not only as a means of creative expression, but also a significant moment of connecting with my friends, which helped us move beyond tribal and cultural barriers. In this moment, I became more and more interested in ways through which I could use clay as a form of cultural expression. Years down the lane, I had the opportunity to pursue art at one of the most prestigious universities in Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. It was in this place that I began developing and honing my skill set as a ceramicist. In as much as the curriculum was tailored in such a way that it trained me as an industrial portrait, where you make bowls, plates, cups, sort of like really learning the technicalities of ceramics. I was very much interested in reimagining not just the technical aspect of these forms, but connecting it in such a way that will help me express myself as an individual. I remember vividly during my final year, an assignment given by one of the studio instructors to combine 2 or more bowls into a sculptural piece. This exercise helped me reimagine bowls, plates, and cups in a different light. In as much as this was just an assignment, I was also interested in using this assignment to highlight my experiences as someone who grew up in a marginalized community in Ghana. With this piece titled Sounds of Life, I'm telling a story of how my siblings and I grew up and how each of us was able to carve a unique path in as much as we came out of a community that was marginalized in Ghana. These forms mimic the old calabash and gourd fruit, which was sort of like resurfaced in my bodies of work. These instruments are usually used during festive occasions, and they do not have distinct sounds. This idea strongly also connected or resonated with the idea that I was exploring in this work. A few moments after my undergraduate study, I had the opportunity to move to US to study my master's in arts at Eastern Illinois University. Upon transitioning from Ghana into US, I encountered a very tragic event to where one of my siblings was battling with sickle cell. In order to process and navigate through this, I collaborated with one of the professors from Eastern Illinois University's science department I would draw samples of my blood and spend countless number of hours at the science laboratory, just sort of like observing how these cells move around in our bloods. Then as I spend time with these observations, I'll make some sketches in the lab, go back to my studio. One thing that I was thinking about was to find ways to recreate this idea of a utopian world where all these cells have very regular shapes. Because when you look at sickle cells, some of the red and white blood cells have really irregular shapes. So I was interested in creating this idea where all these cells had regular shape. It was my own small way of processing that grief and sort of like helping me navigate through what I was feeling in those moments. So it led to this body of work that I created, and this is more like the final installation that was installed in Glen Gale Gallery at Eastern Illinois University. After making this body of work, one thing that I realized was that I could actually pick single pieces of these forms and sort of like start reiterating it or start authoring it in ways through which it becomes more of a single sculptural object than something that it's a whole or a full installation. So varying of this utopian world, I started becoming more curious about what happens to the human body and how cultures over the years have used the human body for various cultural expressions. I looked at specific cultures in Ghana like the Gonja, the Mampuses, the Frafres, and even as far as specific countries, even in Africa, looking at even the Maasai men and how they use these various forms of body markings and body painting to sort of like connect to specific cultures. In my exploration, I discovered intriguing cultural parallels because during my research, one thing that I realized was that when it comes to body markings like scarification, tribal marks, and what have you, it just doesn't stay within the confines of Africa. There was a cultural parallel that was drawn. When you move to the Western world, it's more about tattooing the body and different forms of body modifications. These forms were connected to me as a person because they are sort of like taking the shape of what the red blood cells looked like. So I began thinking of these forms as a representation of me and who I am and how these cultural markings have shaped the identity of my forefathers and largely African people and the diaspora. So these are all different forms of iterations of what I was thinking about. While I was thinking of ways through which I could push the boundaries of my vessels, because I became more and more interested in the idea of not just using the red blood cell shape or the white blood cell shapes, but sort of like pushing my vessels to where once you see it, it resonates with you as maybe a more figural. You look at the head, you look at the shoulder, you look like the feet and what have you. So while I was thinking of ways through which I could push the boundaries of my vessels, I encountered a body of work by David McDowell. I'm sure most of us are very familiar with him. He also embellished his forms with linear patterns and reference African body. So this is a body of work that I worked on. It's called Body, literally body. So in this series of work titled Body, I was thinking of these vessels as human figures and how these figures are sort of like represented in different cultures, just like looking at my specific culture, Ghana, and how the Gonjas, the Mampuses, and all these, even the Asantes, where the tribe that I come from, how they use these mark makings to connect to specific cultures and what have you. So these are different forms that I made with this sculptural piece. Upon further research, I became more and more interested in the idea of using clay, just like my formative years as a child, going to riverbanks to dig out clay and come back into my home and make play toys out of it. I became very interested in sort of like probing that idea further. So as a way of trying to navigate the cultural expression in America with that of Ghana, I needed to understand what I have come to believe and understand as an authentic Ghanaian culture. I chanced upon a very profound cultural theorist known as Humi Melba, which he was talking about the idea of the third space theory, and it has a strong connection or resonance with cultural hybridity. I was curious to know and understand what traditional Ghanaian culture would look like in the context of the school systems, looking at all these various institutions in Ghana. I mean, I believe in the idea of globalization, but at the same time, I was also sort of like really examining what if we never had these classrooms as Ghanaians, if our culture had been allowed to gradually evolve by itself rather than having external fighters like colonization, even being in the neo-colonial era, some of these things that happens with it. So sort of like really questioning these institutions and all these systems that have been established through colonialism and using that to really reflect on my culture as a Ghanaian. I was curious to know and understand what a traditional Ghanaian culture would have looked like in the context of the school systems, governance, and even my own identity as a Ghanaian. Like, would I be able to speak English? Would I be able to stand in front of this wonderful audience to be able to articulate myself in this regard? Or probably I could even be speaking another language. So just the idea of probing all these things that I've come to really believe. So in this context, I became more interested in the social, education, and cultural transformation that was happening to me as I moved from Ghana to the United States. I researched cultural elements like the gourd fruit and calabash together with the Ghana Must Go bags. These elements had a long-standing history with migration and how some Ghanaians moved to other parts of the world in search of greener pastures. So specifically, the Ghana Must Go bag became an iconic symbol of migration in the mid-80s where Ghanaians moved to Nigeria. What happened was that there was an economic boom in Nigeria, so most Ghanaians fled to Nigeria in search of greener pastures. And the Nigerians realized that Ghanaians were looting the system, they were taking a lot of resources and what have you to develop their country. So the next thing that happened was what we call xenophobia. So the Nigerians started killing and fighting all these immigrants that were within that space. And the only thing that the Ghanaians could sort of like do was to flee for their lives. And in fleeing for their lives, you couldn't go back home. So the only thing that was accessible at that time was the Ghana Must Go back. So you grab one, put your belongings in, and you just head straight to the border. So I researched these specific cultural elements and connected it to my experiences in America and what I'm feeling. So I created these forms that mimic the shape of the gourd fruit and also added the Ghana Must Go bag as an element that speaks to migration and challenges that comes with adapting to new cultural environment. These forms had a sense of precariousness owing to the transitory nature of what I was experiencing in the US, being a new cultural landscape and language. A lot of things was happening to me at that point in time. To further understand this idea, I began looking at how even geographic, political, or cultural boundaries had a specific impact on individuals, which led me to an intriguing journey. I discovered a piece by Barbara Hepworth, and one of the things that really resonated with me with this piece was, as a sculptor, she spent countless number of hours in various landscapes, and she would come back into her studio and she would sort of like create these sculptural vessels. And basically what she was trying to communicate or what she was trying to emphasize was her experience in this landscape. She wanted her audience to also experience the same thing. And that was something that really resonated strongly with me. So this inspired me to create another body of work that uses the metaphor of a vessel to express my feelings about the American landscape as an immigrant. There is a dual sense of freedom and confinement, freedom in the vast opportunities and openness of the US, yet feeling of being encapsulated perhaps by cultural differences or the boundaries of my own experiences. To illustrate this complex sentiment, I incorporated the Ghana Must Go bags into the openings of the vessels. These bags, with their own story of migration, displacement, symbolize the integrate layers of my journey. This artistic choice was a way to convey the blend of liberation and limitation that characterized my experiences in US. So these are all various forms that I created in connection with that body of work. So presently in my studio practice, one thing that I've been thinking about is I was once an international student and I've sort of like transitioned from that phase to where I'm teaching in the US or probably I'm an assistant professor. So I was reading this book by Chimamanda Ngozi, a really prolific Nigerian writer. She also immigrated into the US and she talked about a lot of things in this book, and there are specific themes in this book that really resonated with me. And I began thinking about the idea of a collective experience, not just voicing my experiences through this vessel, but sort of like thinking about different international students, different Ghanaians, Africans who are also in this space and what they are going through within specific geographical location. So what I did was that I engage in long conversations with these friends and I record the conversation and I go go back to my studio, listen to them, play the conversations over and over and over and over again. And one thing that I was thinking about a lot was the fact that I see myself as a clay scribe, sort of like translating their experiences using clay, just like a journalist would go to the field, listen to whatever is happening, come back to their space and sort of like recreate or rewrite those stories. So I saw myself in that regard. So just looking at a collective experience and working my way through. So that's just me in my studio working on my current body of work. Thank you all so much.
In 2020, as many of us in this room I lost my access to my ceramic studio when the pandemic hit. I turned to photography as my creative outlet at that time. Then, following the murder of George Floyd, I began documenting the BLM protests in Philadelphia. The pandemic hit when I was getting my MFA, and so that really shook the floor beneath my feet, really. And when I went out into the protests, I started to use my images to amplify the movement beyond the streets. I began to ask myself, how do I capture the energy of the moment, and how do I carry that energy into the future? I wanted to think about, as an artist, what my role could be in the movement for Black lives. Through this experience of documenting the protests, I began to realize the importance, and I started to witness the power of telling your own story, that we should not leave the narrative in the hands of others. I was fortunate to have my photos from the protests featured in the June 22nd, 2020 issue of The New Yorker. This was a real shock and a really surreal moment for me. Seeing my work spread around the world affirmed in me the power in an image and the power that an image can have, and how I can use the images to tell my side of the story. Coming back to my ceramic practice after this experience was a pretty hard transition for me. I was really in a really weird, dark place, psychologically, physically, emotionally, and I needed a new way to express what I was going through in that moment and what was happening around me in the world in a different way in clay. Up until that point, I was really only doing pottery and making functional vessels. And I felt that and I had been doing that for about 11 or 12 years. And I knew that coming back to this medium, I had to actually reintroduce myself to the medium and figure out a different way to speak to what was going on. My ceramic work, my sculptural work, is really began to be rooted in the observations of my environment and reflecting, absorbing, and reinterpreting the world around me. Living in North Philly, I thought about the broken down infrastructure, the gun violence, the police presence that was constant and was surrounded us on a daily basis. And I wanted to speak to that. And I wanted to speak to what I had just been experiencing in the protests. My sculptures really talk about how that environment and those experiences, how they collect on us and how we carry that with us. But I also wanted to point to the resilience of the people who live in that environment and in the Black and Brown community in Philadelphia, and the resilience of the people there. Coming back to clay, my first, reintroduction to clay, I had the Riot series, which is a series of small vessels, cup forms really, where I started to, through pushing and pulling, tearing and repairing, I started to see new patterns emerge in my work, and I started to discover a new language I could use to speak through the clay. There's sort of this call and response with the material that I really fell in love with and felt natural and organic to me. And these are some of the first iterations of that work. And I also started to experiment with introducing that new language to figurative work as well. Then came about my thesis show, and I was really trying to figure out how I could further this ideas of how we are carrying our environment. And I also wanted to reincorporate the use of my photos with my sculptures as well. I wanted to use this show as an opportunity to take the environment around me and turn it into a place of sanctuary. And the following is actually an excerpt from some of the writing I was doing around my work. How do we carry our environment with us? Does it lift us up, burden us? How do we patch ourselves and cover our scars? What parts of us are unmoved, unburdened, and unchained? What role do I play in the growth and destruction of my own community? I think about how, as a Black person living in this country, we often find ourselves with no sanctuary, no place where we feel truly safe or free to be ourselves, even if that's in our own homes. So where do we go when there's nowhere to go? When we must find peace within ourselves, when there is only chaos around us, we have to find an inner sanctuary, this place I call the upper room. And that was actually the title of my thesis show. I started to be able to take the elements that, kind of made up the physical and cultural landscape of the environment that I was in, and, really recreate that and reinterpret that to become a place of contemplation and reflection. So my Moro series is one of my most recent series. This body of work came out of my trip to Portugal. During this trip, I learned of Portugal's role in the transatlantic slave trade, and as well as the history of Africans on the peninsula in general. And as I traveled through and I documented my trip in the areas I was in and the areas I was researching, I started to see the many ways my journey was entangled with the history of this land. In this series, I was really excited to use, again, the image and the sculptures themselves to tell that story and to bring that history to life and to actually put the viewer in the place where this history and these stories come from. I believe it is really important for us to understand our place in history. We often talk about ceramics as a material that has so much permanence. The marks that we make in the clay will last long after we're dead and gone. But at the same time, that can also be said about the decisions we make in our day-to-day lives. The consequences of our actions in this crucial time in history can and will have long-lasting implications for generations to come. On December 3rd, 2023, I participated in a protest in Philadelphia calling for the ceasefire in the war in Gaza, an end to the genocide being committed against the Palestinian people, and an end to the occupation of Palestine. Hundreds of protesters marched through the streets from the Rittenhouse Square to the intersection of 40th Market in West Philly. This protest had ended at a vigil at University City Townhomes. The University City Townhomes this week were actually demolished, and the vigil that I attended was mourning the displacement of 71 Black and brown families that are having their homes torn down this week to be replaced by high-rises. When I woke up the next morning after this protest, I was met with national news calling the protest an anti-Semitic mob. A quote from Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania said that the purposeful gathering of a mob outside of a restaurant simply because it is owned by a Jewish person, well, that's anti-Semitism, plain and simple. And that is a statement that I would agree with if that is what happened that day. What actually happened that day is we briefly stopped in front of a place called Goldie's. Goldie's is a Israeli deli. And we stopped briefly there to call out the firing of 2 workers there, including one of the managers who were wearing Palestinian flag pins. And the silencing of those voices in that space is what was being called out. And it was a brief moment in an hours-long protest. And I believe that the way this was covered in the media and the way this was reacted to by our state and federal government was to silence the voices and was to confuse the message that was actually behind that protest that day. The reality is that there was a broad coalition of people from all different walks of life and backgrounds and faiths, and the people there could see the parallels between the displacement of those 71 Black and brown families and the displacement and the bombing of Gaza and the violence that we see in the West Bank. But there is something I want to acknowledge. Over 1,100 Israelis were killed on October 7th, including 695 civilians, 36 were children. Over 250 hostages were taken. As on the date of that protest, December 4th, over 15,000 Palestinians had been killed. Over 6,000 of them were children. And as of today, that number is far over 32,000. And I believe that anyone who wants peace should be able to acknowledge this. And these are not just statistics. These are people. These are human beings. Their families will never get them back. Their communities have been destroyed. It will never be the same. The first thoughts that come to your mind when you see these statistics is to justify, is to excuse, is to downplay the killing of those innocent people, then you're losing your ability to see the humanity of the victims of this conflict before or after October 7th. And I think that's a very dangerous thing to lose sight of. And when we silence the voices calling for liberation, when we silence the voices calling for peace, we are silencing those who fight to recognize the humanity of the victims of this conflict before or after October 7th. And I refuse to be silent when my country provides money and bombs to a government who has shown through their actions that they do not recognize the humanity of the people of Gaza and the West Bank. And I refuse to be silent. When the US government, through their actions, refuses to recognize the humanity of the people of Gaza and the West Bank, at its best, at its core, the ceramic community is one that makes us feel safe, makes us feel seen, makes us feel heard. It is one that lifts us up, and is one that where we can hold each other accountable. And I believe that we must acknowledge that there are people in our communities, there's people in this conference, and there's people in this room that are fearful of their safety, and they're fearful of what may happen to them as a result of this war in Gaza. And there may be people in this room who have already been directly affected by this conflict before or after October 7th. So when we leave here today, I hope that we can continue to make this place that we all love, a place where a Palestinian, a Jewish person, an Arab, a Muslim, and people from all walks of life can come to find a place to be seen, to be heard, and a place where they can be lifted up and where they can hold us accountable. Thank you.